Hi, everyone. So excited to be here, especially with my good friends, Jason Gerardo and Dave Snell. Today's word is perspective, and that can apply to almost everything, and it probably does. But having the right perspective can really put you on the right path to a greater success and enjoyment. With that said, let's bring Dave to the table and see what his initial thoughts on perspective are. Dave?
Well, okay, right off the bat. Okay. Everybody, it's always good to be here. Say that every week, and I mean it every week because I look forward to this day and I cancel other things just to make sure I can join this. Um, Perspective is an important word that I think a lot of people have ignored of late when they look at bigger pictures. They think that their piece of a puzzle is the most critical piece of a puzzle, and that without their perspective, everybody else is wrong and everybody else is wildly ignorant of the greater world. So I think when we start to look at big problems and big picture issues going on in our day-to-day lives, our local lives, our global life, national lives to global, perspective is a very important thing to have to make sure that you realize that you're just a little piece of this big picture, and how we approach these things will have a greater impact on our mental health, our physical health, and our relationships with those around us.
Excellent way to launch off today. And I'd share a lot of what I have to say, but I'd squeeze Jason out of the foundation, foundational part of the show, which is to build up to it. So, Jason, love to hear what your perspective is on perspective.
Good morning, and as Dave said, it's always great to be here. Thank you for having me and then having us on, Don. The one thing that I'll piggyback on that Dave said is basically remember, perspective is a point of view. It is not the point of view. And that's
Mhm.
something that I think we miss a lot. And that's something as we look at issues in our personal lives too, we can look at, okay, I'm looking at it this way and why. This to me means this and why. So you have a certain perspective, you have a certain perspective also is a way of looking at something. So you have your own, once again, filters that show up on how you look at something. But then do you ever ask yourself, well, why am I looking at it that way? Why is it showing up in my life like this? So taking a further step back from your perspective, from your personal perspective, is to look at the bigger picture of, well, where's that coming from? We get ingrained in that, well, this is the way it is, and this is my point of view, and it is personal, and you do matter. Of course, it's your life. But as we look at something, as Dave said, as we look at something global, you have to realize that you're a piece of that global picture. And so maybe there are other point of views that are relevant or maybe even better for that situation than what you're looking at. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I got to give us all a pat on the back because we're getting really good at this and launching it really fast and well. What comes to mind when I think of perspective, to follow up on what you two gentlemen have offered, is it's also situational, conditional, and relative,
Yeah.
right? So the challenge is when perspective turns into judgment, because perspective will always change. Judgment seems to stick around a lot longer.
Yeah.
When you're feeling happy, your perspective on the same thing changes. I mean, it goes back to the half glass of water full or empty. It's the same amount of water in the same glass. Where are you coming from? And as well as I do, there's people who are like spark plugs and fire you up, and there's people who are like anchors and drag you down. And you almost know that going in, sometimes even without knowing the person, based on their posture, based on how they greet you, based on their facial expression. So you're constantly picking up tips to guide you in your perspective, but it changes. And, so in other words, today's perspective will be different tomorrow. Why? Because you had a day with this perspective. You had all the events that transpired between now and then. And now you've got a new day. So if one could look at a perspective as more of a weather vane, that continues to guide you, but you can't always assume the direction it's going to guide you in. It's a first step in forming ideas, to a later point, maybe judgments, or at a certain point, maybe you get a sense of certainty where you're a solid perspective on that, right? You're not going to change. I mean, let's say you hate spinach. That's your perspective, right? No matter what you think, you're still not going to get attracted to spinach. Now you can eat it, but you'll probably eat it holding your nose or choking it down. And maybe that's what life is about too, where you got to accept what comes with it, whether it's something that's aligned with you or not. And your perspective flows. So whoever you're with, whoever you're talking to, you're starting to share it. Let me tell you what I think about this. Well, let me tell you about, all of a sudden people get perspectives that they never knew where they came from. Why? Well, my doctor said I should start drinking more milk, right? I mean, whatever the case. Now that's my value or interest or direction. So, Dave.
Yeah, I think it was a great analogy you made there with the weather vane and how things are going to change. And it reminded me of our conversation a couple of weeks ago with NLP and machine learning and AI. Is think of all the data points that are coming at us every day. That if you think your perspective is going to stay the same minute to minute or day to day, then you've lost the bigger picture, because things are always in flux. But to Jason's point, I think if I recall it correctly, and I'm translating this correctly, I think it tied very deeply into the word empathy and being able to see the bigger picture from somebody else's perspective,
Right.
and change your views based on that. I'm not talking diametrically opposed, but be able to understand another's perspective, because it can broaden your own. Is what I was thinking when you were talking about your definition of perspective or thoughts on perspective, Jason. And it really is, again, we always come back to this, is the interrelationships between people, and empathy is a great word for that. And your perspective will drive how you can empathize or not with other people.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of relationship between all those elements, and it's important to appreciate that. Jason?
Yeah, great start to the conversation. A couple points came up, and I have something in my pocket that I might pull out later if we have time and it fits the conversation. In NLP, it's called perceptual positions, and it's actually a technique that you do to help people to see the other side of if they're having a conflict. But maybe we'll get to it. Maybe we won't today. But that's here in my pocket. Something that Dawn said that struck something a chord with me is that different people, different perspective. And we talk a lot about the echo chambers, staying out of the echo chambers, because you get in that echo chamber, meaning that everyone has that same thought process and everyone thinks the same and everyone has to think the same. You lose perspective. You no longer have a perspective. You have what you're being told by groupthink, So it's very important that you do surround yourself with different groups of people, and you do find these different avenues to have these conversations like this. We have a community here, we have us talking, you have more people joining the conversation in the next couple of weeks, which is exciting, and bringing that new perspective. So it's very important for that. And something else that I wouldn't be Jason if I didn't bring some of this stuff up. I want to share a quote from Rabindranath Tagore, and this is paraphrasing, but he says, "A snake that will not shed its skin is bound to die. A mind that does not think is no longer mind." And by that means that, if we stop looking for different perspectives, if we stop learning and we stop growing and we stop being open to other ways of doing things, then we're wasting all this talent, all these skills that we have. It's being wasted. So that's the natural form of things, is for us to look at new ways to see things and to grow and develop. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think we're starting to build a strong case for understanding why we have the perspectives we have.
Yeah.
And how true are those perspectives, because eventually they get tested. And again, semantics is an interesting area. But I used to think, but now I believe this. or this is how I used to look at the world. And I think that's a good frame to put it in, is how do you see things around you? How do you see people around you? And are you an optimist? Do you believe, they say faith is the belief in the invisible. Can you believe in something that isn't here yet, that may not be as tangible, but you just perceive it? And I think perception and perspective kind of can get married pretty easily. And does it serve you? I think,
Exactly.
there is no honest perspective. Again, it's what kind of lenses you're looking through, right? And, is this something that you say, I'm really happy to have my belief system, my perspective on things. But, I think the other element is, how do you relate with other people and their perspectives? How welcoming are you? Someone could say, I hate chocolate ice cream, and somebody says, I love it, but I hate vanilla, and they love it. Does that make a difference? Are you going to convert somebody to your way or your perspective? And I think that's where sometimes harm gets done, right? People are just a feather in the wind. Oh, I just met this guru. I just read this book, and now everything is going to be just great. Well, the world doesn't change as much as you'd like it to. And it's not always the world you want or you hope for. But, every ending is a new beginning. And every new beginning is an opportunity. And, you can change. And I think that's the key element. Whatever you believed in, the other night I was just thinking, boy, wouldn't it be great if I could go back to when I was 7, 8 years old with talking to myself as I am now, and how many of the challenges and issues that you thought were so dramatic could have been settled really easily. And I think that's part of maturity. It takes time to mature. You just don't leap to an unknown. But it also brings hope and optimism. Right. Because if in the past, I used to say to people, have you ever made a mistake in your life? And they'd say, sure. And I said, well, could it ever happen again? Like right now? Like what we're talking about. It's a little facetious, but, it's the adjustability of it. It's the tolerance. When you can listen to everybody and respect what they have to say and understand their situation, and not say, be like me, or I know better, you don't. Are you really lifting people up? Are you lifting yourself up, or are you dragging people down? And those are questions that are vital to ask yourself. So, Dave.
Again, I think what you just said, how we can see things differently and new opportunities and perspectives change. Look at my current life. Things have changed. I've moved to a new place. I've, left some family behind. I've moved closer to other family. Things change. I was struck by your comment that if I could go back to my 7-year-old self, and I was thinking to myself, I don't think I would believe me. I would say you're full of it, mister, and you didn't age very well, but what do I need to do different? But I think your point about maturing and that process that our perceptions, perspectives, impressions will change over time, will mature us, is very, very important. Because just going back and talking to myself and saying, you need to do this, this, and this, or if you do this, you may end up in this path, I'm not going to believe it until I experience it. And experience is so much a part of our lives that change our perspective, our perceptions of what's going on around us. And so many youth of today, like I've talked when I lived up in Virginia Beach, I talked to my neighbors' kids and some other people in the area. They're stuck in their video games. They're stuck on their computers. They're stuck in their rooms. And teenagers, I get it, isolate a lot, or a good bit, many of them. But if they don't get out and experience the world, that perception will always stay the same. That perspective will never adapt to what's happening around them.
Absolutely. Jason?
Yeah, just to touch, you have a good comment when the rest of us want to jump on it. So Don, to your 7-year-old comment, I was thinking about it, And to Dave's point too, it's like, if you did do that, would you listen and would you go back? And no, I don't think so, because, where does perspective come from? It comes from lessons, it comes from learning, and there has to be a bridge, to go from that 7-year-old living in the world they're living in to the world that we're living in now. There's a lot that has to happen. And there's a lot of little minor decisions that are going to be made along that way that are going to open up doors or close doors, and it's going to change things. And if you were to do that, time travel is always interesting. The way it affects the world now might not be the way you want it to. So you might wake up as yourself in a new world that you're like, why is everything different? Because you changed that 7-year-old's perspective, and it didn't go the way it was going to go. Talking about different perspectives and for different reasons, I just kind of switching gears. I just had a coffee chat with someone from South Africa a couple days ago. And if I try to talk to her from my perspective, per se, about her situation in her world, it wouldn't align. So, and same way with her, but, I can't understand what it's like to live in Cape Town. I don't know the socioeconomic dynamic there. I don't know she was talking about the crime there and stuff like that. And we all have our situations. And, of course, the US, what's going on now, and in our politics came up a little bit, but we were just kind of connecting. But when you try to put your perspective on someone else and you don't know who they are and where they live and what they're about, you're forcing a view that's not going to be right for them. So it's the balance of what we said from the very beginning, is figuring out, being open to, well, what's your situation? What's the dynamic in your world? And then go from there. And, one of the main precepts of NLP is respect for the model of the world. So I might not agree with you, but I respect that that's what your world looks like. And do we want to shift? Do you want to shift? Well, let's figure that out, and does it make sense for us to be connected? If we can agree on disagreeing, or if we can agree on certain things, that's right. But if it comes to, well, I respect that's how you feel, and I don't want any part of it, that's also an option. So perspective is an interesting thing, because it can be a guidepost in the wrong way if you let it, but also in a positive way, because it lets you kind of find your tribe. And it's not about, well, you agree with me, so I like you. It's, can we agree that we can be flexible in our thinking? I think that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it brings a point to the table, is curiosity and questioning, how did you get that perspective, right? You get people who say, I hate this, I like this, and some of it is new stuff. I mean, if I was to start talking about ChatGPT to someone who had no idea what it was, it'd be hard to even understand my perspective if you don't even know the subject. The other thing that happens, I was with my wife and her girlfriends the other day, and a lot of them are big travelers. So they go to Europe and Asia and all these exotic places. And one said, when I graduated college, like a long time ago, I went to Europe quite a bit. And as an American, I was viewed differently than I am now. Right? And she hasn't changed, but I'm now carrying the perception or perspective of what an American is because of what American does. Right? And so a lot of times it's earned, and sometimes it's just accepted that you have to go with the flow. And I think that's where discrimination comes in. There's usually ignorance, or comparing something to a situation or a person earlier in your life, and now you just group people in that perspective, versus tolerance, versus patience, versus that's interesting, I don't really understand it, can you explain it to me? Or maybe there's a bridge. Maybe when you combine your justification and foundation to mine, we both come up with a different perspective that we wouldn't have. So everything is in the process of being molded. It's not stagnant. It's going to change. Hit your toe against something. See what your perspective is for after that. Right? Everything that could come out of your mouth will probably come out of your mouth instantly. Yeah. But it's temporary, right? As soon as you get away from your toe hurting or whatever. But I think the element of fun and humor has to play a role too in perspective, where you find something interesting and not threatening. Someone, can have a different perspective, but it doesn't take anything away from yours. It just offers you another opportunity to see what somebody else is. And, just like comparing notes, is like, well, I didn't take that into consideration, or that was a fact I wasn't aware of. And now that I am, I mean, if you said, hey, you're going to Cape Town and it's one of the most dangerous places in the world, it's going to change your perspective of where you go, how you go there, and how aware you are. And if you go into a place that's serene and peaceful and safe, you don't even wonder what's around the corner or who is this person coming up the street.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of elements that play a role in it. Dave.
Yeah, I think my thinking here is going that, our perception, I think we're mixing perception, and perspective and perception, and that's okay. The old line was that your perception is reality. And that's only reality for what you are seeing at the time. We've said this several times in the last 20 minutes, is perceptions, perspectives are going to change over time. And so if somebody thinks I was a jackass back in 2002, and they relay that to somebody new today, well, things have changed in 23 years. So I see a lot of people going back to, well, I met him back in 2000, he must really still be a jackass. Well, no, he's had other experiences. And if we go in with a perception or perspective of negativity, we're going to get negativity. Right. And how we go into it. So to your point, Don, if I go to Cape Town and someone has told me that it's violent, but I go into it with the perception or perspective of, I've heard that it has some violent tendencies in areas, but I will do my best to enjoy wherever I do. That's my reality. I'm ignoring or not experiencing all the negative crime and other perceptions of other people, but I have at least, calibrated that rheostat to say, I'm going to look for positive in this world. And to your point too, Don, I mean, the counter to that is you can go too far with that rheostat, and I'm going to see everything is rosy. In this ideal situation in Cozumel, oh my gosh, I'm being mugged, because I didn't look for. But there's again a rheostat somewhere we have to look for the positives while acknowledging that life isn't always rosy, and yet I'm going to find the rosiness in life. And I go to that every time. In my mind is my mother. One of my adopted mothers, and she's like the closest to a mother I've had in a long time. And I could say that the sky is falling, and she will come back with, "We'll make the best of it." Her perspective is, "Look, it's a small price. We'll figure out how we're going to make it well and good for everybody." And that's what you got to do.
Yeah, and that's how you take care of your perspective and protect it, by judging it sometimes, reviewing it, but I'll switch to Jason because I know I can get off on a tangent easily.
Well, that's the beauty of these conversations. I think we're all very respectful of staying to the topic and trying to keep the conversation around there. But where it goes, right? I mean, Don, you've done 1,000 of these now. That's where the beauty is. That's where the joy is when you take the side streets. And that's my perspective. There we go. Tied it in. Something I wanted to share, and I was thinking about this as I was thinking about this word and coming here and talking with the community today. Quick story. So I was in the Marine Corps. I worked on jets. I was a jet engine mechanic. I was also a plane captain, which meant I did the inspections, and I was the one that kind of handled the planes and stuff. And I also got a certification to be what's called turn qual, meaning that I was able to, and it doesn't sound like much, but it was actually pretty cool, and it was actually a high honor I actually got to sit in the cockpit and fire the jets up and run the systems. So I had to get certified and do all these classes and stuff. And so, got me in some trouble because I like to run the engines up hard because, to try it. And Yuma, Arizona at 10 p.m. at night didn't like me running the engines up at 90%. That's another story for another day. But one of the things that I learned about that is, and there's a term called parallax air. and it's on your gauges. So if the way you look at your gauges, if you're looking from a different angle at your gauges, you're not going to get the right reading, because the gauges read a certain way. And if you're up high, it looks lower than it is. If you're down low, it looks, it goes the other way. And so you have to be aware of, I mean, they did it in design. It's designed so that doesn't happen. So if a pilot's flying through the air at 400 miles an hour, they don't have to, oh, is that the right reading? They have to be able to look and just trust their gauges and then go. But with me just sitting in the cockpit, sitting on the ground, I was able to, spend more time with it. And it touched me, because it was like, that's perspective. If you're really high or really low based on what this situation is, you're not seeing the true situation, for whatever that is. For when we won't get into what true is today, of course, but it just changes though. And you have to be aware of that. And so maybe it comes time when you look at, well, where's the other person at that they're seeing something like this? Or explaining. We don't like to explain ourselves. We get really anchored in on something, and this is how I see it and this is how it is. But maybe you say, you know what, let me explain. This is how I see it, because this has happened and this has happened, and I've been exposed to this, and this is why I see it that way. You might change your own mind, or you might share with somebody else so they can have more insight into how you're seeing things, and you might find agreement somewhere in there.
Yeah, so many wonderful points and insights that are being shared today. First, I want to welcome Usman for coming to the show today. And it's always great to have people support the show and be here live with us and sharing our perspective. And comments are there for people to share their perspective at the same time. OG is here. Thank you, OG. Great to be part of the family together. And I hope you're enjoying it. And, looking at perspective and looking at this show, when I think of the 900 shows I've done, and I was doing them 7 days a week, the question really always comes down to, or should come down to, why? And I've been able to get 900 different perspectives from 900 different people doing 900 different things in 900 different places, and coming together freely and eagerly, right? Where nothing is forced, but everything is offered. And by that generosity, it was almost like getting therapy 7 days a week from 7 people and giving it back. So it was kind of like co-coaching, and then you have a riff, right? Where someone takes you off on a place, or like a magic carpet ride, and you're riding it and you're sharing your perspective of things that you never was that totally interested or aware of. And it's also how generous you are in spirit to the other person. The idea is not to compete. It's to cooperate. It's to reinforce. Someone says, I just had this experience and it changed my whole perspective. You don't want to come in and say, well, let me tell you about that, right? You want to come back and say, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. And it sounds like it's really helping you, right? And that's what people want with their perspective, is support. How many people close up to you when they tell you what they're thinking or feeling and you don't care, right? I like this and I enjoy this. Well, that's great. When you have time and you have resources, take care of it, versus, hey, let me help you, or let me get behind you, because what comes around goes around. Everything is somewhat reciprocal. No one will continue to work and not get paid depending on the currency, right? If someone does something important to you or valuable and you take it for granted, there's a good chance that's not coming around anytime soon. And sometimes people need help, right? Your birthday's coming up. What can I get for you? And usually the answer is nothing, right? So that's not a good question, And sometimes you could say, I'm between this and that. Which would you prefer? And at least you'll get a legitimate direction out of it. But, like I say, the part of it is having fun and being curious, not taking things personal, making it about it and not you, and it's too easy to get bruised, or if you're overly sensitive, you're better off not getting into certain discussions. You know, I've never really brought politics or religion or anything controversial to the show because, first of all, you're going to cut off half of your audience. The second thing is, all these issues and challenges have been around since mankind. They're not going to change in an hour, and no one's going to change. So why not work with what you have and who you're with and make the most of it? And usually that's what you do in a challenging situation. I didn't want to be here, don't like being here, but as long as we're here, let's try to make the most of it, right? You know, it's kind of funny when my mother lived with us her last couple of years. Every night we had a routine, and every day was a joy because we created it. It could have been a hardship if someone would have taken that perspective. And every night, my mother would say, "What's for dessert?" And I had a whole lineup: fudgicles, creamsicles, drumsticks. It was usually ice cream. And she would always say, "Is that all you have?" And I would say, "Yep." And she would say, "Well, if that's all you have, that's what I'm going to have." You know, and we'd have this routine. And you'd make the best of not the best situation, but it made it worthwhile. And it was because everybody was there for each other. You know, and when you can only find yourself when you forget about yourself sometimes, when you take the armor off, when you're not fighting anymore, when you're not competing, there's not a winner and a loser. You know, that win-win-win always made sense to me. And does it work is the key. Your perspective's only as good as its ability to be productive or constructive to you. You know, I mean, I remember I lived in Detroit. I grew up in inner city Detroit. And what was fascinating, I just had a feel for my environment. Everything around me I was sensitive to and aware of because it could be challenging. And a couple of years ago, I went to Baltimore, and Baltimore kind of just like Detroit. And had a beautiful afternoon. Me and Ann were walked miles. I remember one day I walked 10 miles. And I got into this area in this neighborhood that brought me right back to Detroit. And I looked about a block ahead of me, and guys were sitting on the street corner and hanging out. And I thought to myself, well, that's a warning sign. I'm not going down the street. Now, you could have flipped a coin and I could have walked by and nothing would have happened. At the same time, anybody could do anything or say anything, and where am I going? And what am I going to do? Yeah. And I decided, hey, we're not going down that street. We're going to take another route. Well, it turned out, I know it's a longer story than I anticipated. It was their anniversary. I said, what do you want to do? And they had an aquarium. I said, why don't we just go to the aquarium? And there's a little shopping area. And we went, and it was okay. And then we sat outside waiting for an Uber because I decided I'm not walking 8 miles back. And all of a sudden, 3 guys ran up to a guy, beat the hell out of him, threw him in a busy street. And then 3 other guys on motorcycles called the vigilantes came to see if I knew who those guys were, and they were going to chase him. And then the police showed up. And I said, maybe I had a sixth sense or something, but it was kind of interesting that sometimes your perspective is based on intuition, not based on facts or anything. You just have a feel.
Right.
That, hey, this just doesn't seem right. It doesn't match. And maybe you can get overcome with it, but it could make a difference in how well you survive and how well you deal with situations. So, Dave.
Yeah, I think that's a great story. As a guy who, I'll say I went to high school. I didn't grow up in the area, but at the nexus of DC, Baltimore, and Annapolis, I grew up right in the middle for high school. Spent many time at the Inner Harbor, and I understand that perspective of downtown Baltimore is not the safest place, nor is Southeast DC, which was right next to the county that I went to high school in. And
yeah,
you know, as you're, before you started talking, Don, I started thinking or telling the story, I was starting to think about, you know, our perceptions. It is very important to share our stories, something like this, because it drives perceptions and perspectives of how people see you and they see other things in the world. So, you know, good perspective here was every time I went to the Middle East, you know, to Iraq or Afghanistan, or even sometimes the Philippines, but my mom wasn't so worried about that. And anytime I went to Iraq or Afghanistan, she said, I want to stop watching the news because I see all this bad stuff happening and so many, you know, service members getting injured and killed over there. And I said, Mom, do you understand that we live 30 minutes away, 40 minutes away from Southeast DC and 20 minutes from Inner Harbor, Baltimore? The odds were at the time, the percentages were that I had a greater chance of being killed in Southeast DC than I did in Iraq. And she says, I'm still not watching the TV. I can't imagine. I'm like, but you'll watch it when I'm not there and you'll see the issues in Southeast DC or Baltimore. So it was a perception that she had, a perspective that, okay, if he's over there, I don't want to risk seeing that his name's on the list maybe, or that what's going on. I don't have to worry about him as much. But her perspective was, as soon as I was in the Middle East, we're not watching TV, or at least not watching the news. But telling our stories are very important to perspectives and perceptions, which are driven by perspective drives perception. And if we're not sharing things about ourselves, the perspective and perception that people have of us is driven by just their simple observation and the interaction. Again, I go back to kids. We're not teaching them to interact as well as we used to because they're stuck in their houses, or, you know, during COVID, whatever it was, even before then and after. It's not a COVID driven thing. But that helps understand. And I'll go with a quick story of my own. I shared a 3 or 4 page essay on my experiences with mental health issues and my depression and my suicide attempt. And I sent it to a friend who then said, do you mind if I send this to a couple other folks? I said, no, please go ahead. And they came back, those other people came back to me directly and said, I had no idea you were suffering with that. I said, because you never interacted with me and I was closing myself off. It's just the way it was. Mm-hmm. You had your perspective and perception. I had my own. I thought the world was ending. It wasn't, but you know, it's what happens. But because I shared that story, people's perceptions changed. And that's how we interacting with people will help drive change and adaptation and community again, I think, if we really drive to it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, you make a valuable point. Not only is it possible to affect someone else's perspective, but it affects their perspective of you.
Yeah.
And how do people see you? And some people see you a lot differently than you truly are. And that's a chance to have conversations,
yeah,
you know, or to pick up on something. And, you know, I realize, you know, 2 elements is, where did that come from and where are you going with that? Right? Someone approaches you with a statement. It's like, that came out of the blue, you know, how did you form that? Or why did you say that? And what am I supposed to take away from it? And where does this take us? You know, so sometimes it's a reset. Jason?
So many good points. You know, something that I'm gonna share an East Coast story myself. I'm gonna jump on that wagon here in a second. But I do want to say, you know, perspective, a way of looking at something. In general, what I've come up with over you know, going from that 7-year-old till now, is keeping a curious and flexible mindset. You know, if anyone asks me, you know, my perspective or my point of view, I'm like, I don't know. You know, Wayne Dyer used to say, no one knows enough to be a pessimist. Mm-hmm. I don't know what I don't know. And so I view everything with curious and flexible. So I'm like, hey, let me learn about that. And maybe I'll change my mind. Maybe I'll change the way I look at things, you know, and I'm open to that. I'm not going to change it on a whim. I'm not going to change it because someone wants me to. But if I look at something with my curiosity and say, what's this all about? What can I truly learn? And I'm like, wow, I didn't see it that way before. I didn't understand it from that viewpoint. that is a good viewpoint, and I change, because I'm always trying to learn, always trying to grow. So I'll put that out there. It can be also, it doesn't have to be a specific, well, I think this about this. It could be an idea and how you think of it. And then just for fun, oh, go ahead, Don.
No, please.
I was going to say, for fun, I'm going to share my East Coast story and this is about perspective. 6 months in the Marine Corps, I'm what we call a boot. I'm still a youngster, shaved head still, got that little high and tight. And I was at school on the East Coast. I think I might have been in Virginia or North Carolina at the time. And a bunch of us had I think we had a 96, 4 days off. And we're like, we're going to get a trailer and we're going to go to DC and we're going to see the sights. I'm 18, I think. I probably just turned 18 at the time. I'm a youngster. But my perspective is I'm a Marine. I got this. Nothing can happen to me. And my other perspective is so we were going to go speaking, and you reminded me when you said Southeast, talking about DC. So yes, it's gridded. DC's gridded. If you're not familiar, Southeast is a challenging neighborhood. They've had their struggles. And that's where the Marine Corps barracks are. That's where the commandant of the Marine Corps is. That's where the Marine Corps band is at 8th and I, Southeast DC. We're like, we're going to go check this out. So we drove over there, we parked, we're out walking around, checking things out. My perspective is, once again, we're Marines. We can handle anything. And there's another funny story I won't share today, though, but there's another funny story about how that mindset wasn't the best. Knocked on the commandant's door, but that's for another day. But we went up to the front gate and we were talking to the guard there, and he's like, do you know where you're at? And we're like, oh, we're here at 8th and I. But he's like, no. Do you know where we're at? He's like, you're going to want to get back in your car and go and drive away. He's like, if you don't come inside, you don't want to be out walking around the streets here. And it was during the day. It was early and there was 3 of us. But he's like, and he named off some very negative things that happened in the neighborhood just a couple blocks away over the last few weeks. And we were like, oh, now I have a new perspective. We will now be leaving. So we got the information we needed and we changed our minds and then we left. So I just wanted to share that little 8th and I story.
Yeah, and I think another key element that should be reviewed is how important is your perspective, right? Everybody can have one, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
If you said, hey, the Eagles are playing the 49ers today. Well, if I don't really care about either team, I don't really care about the game that much. So it's like, if it's a home team, it's something you're vested in, you feel a little connection to it. But again, it's not you. And confusing things with you or situations with you is not fair to yourself. At the same time, growing up in Detroit had its benefits. So there's not like bad and good. Right. There's a lot of gray that you have to decipher. What you don't want to do is feel something, believe something, and not follow it. And later on, you have a regret. Yeah. I knew I should have never walked down that street. I just knew it. I said it, but I didn't follow through. And now whose fault is it? In Detroit, I used to always say, there'd be more crime if there'd be more victims, right? Because if you kept walking in the wrong places, doing the wrong thing, there was one case, and I'm not knocking Detroit, it's actually on the way up and it's making tremendous changes and it deserves everything it has going for it because it's got a great population of hardworking people, meat and potatoes people, and people who will help you, Growing up, in the earlier days, the cars were all rear-wheel drive with huge engines in the front. Right. Which meant in the snow, you weren't going anywhere. Right? And, the only way for traffic to move is people would get out of their car and push you or help you shovel, right? And I never had to wait very long for someone to run out of their house and say, can I help you with that? And that made me feel like, hey, that's important. And there were times I was in bad situations and good people showed up. So you can't really judge everybody just by, generalization. But, there is a point where your perspective, like I say, supports what you are, who you are, and aligns with it. And because, if you believe someone to be something or somebody, and all of a sudden they start spouting stuff off that doesn't relate to that, you're going to change your perspective about them.
Yeah.
How many times I say I had that person figured wrong. I'm usually pretty good with this. How did I get fooled, or how did I not see it? And sometimes you see what you want to see, right? And sometimes people are categorized for reasons that aren't their responsibility or fault. How many times a teacher sees you 20 years later and says you were the worst kid in the class, you're nothing but trouble. And looking at yourself today, is I didn't look at myself that way, but I definitely didn't turn out that way. And that story about the two twins who were growing up with an abusive father.
Yeah.
Right? And one turned out to be a lawyer, the other one ended up in jail. And they both had the same excuse. Well, what would you have turned out to be if that was who your father was? And so I guess it's no different than the Warsaw test, or whatever you want to call it, is see a bunch of blobby ink, and all of a sudden someone is seeing unicorns and elephants and someone else is seeing something else. But I think at the end of the day, the fun part about living is discovery, is seeing something new and different that continually, gradually changes your perspective. You don't go from vanilla to chocolate overnight unless you didn't really care about vanilla in the first place, or didn't have a problem with chocolate. And you could be by ice cream oriented if you want to be, where you can enjoy both of them. So I forgot where we let off. I think Dave.
Oh yeah, tough acts to follow here on this one. Again, we're getting to that point where I start to not know what else to add. I think your point, Don, on is my perspective important? Does it matter to somebody else's in this regard? And when you were talking, I'm thinking, just because I have a perception or perspective on some topic, do I have to share it? Will it add anything to a conversation, or am I doing it for myself, or am I doing it just to be combative? And I think too many people nowadays just feel that I have a right, therefore I need to exercise it. And they forget that it's not really adding something to a conversation. And that has driven divisiveness writ large, not just in politics, but just in our day-to-day relationships with people. I saw a video earlier of, and again, I'm not trying to get political or go down this path, but a girl said, well, I hate all cops because one killed my cousin. Well, that's a bigoted statement in and of itself, because you're putting everybody in the same category without bigger picture. But what did that add to the conversation? Well, she didn't really explain what the circumstances were behind her cousin's death. It was just, a cop did it, therefore I'm going to have this perspective that all cops are bad. So it really did. When I look back at the overall conversation that I saw between these two people, the cop and the young lady, I said, well, that didn't really add much. It was just kind of your initial perspective, and you really didn't want to talk about it. So why not share more? I wish you would have.
Yeah, that's a great point also. And with that point, I'll switch it to Jason to build on it.
Different people having different perspectives is something that's key. And that's something we've all been talking about, and to your point, but yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. It's like, are we adding to the conversation? Are we detracting? And, people are going to feel what they're going to feel. And it's not saying, now, obviously anything that's bigoted or anything that's, XYZ that's not positive, because it's at the detriment of relationships with other people. It's the detriment of your positive mental health if you're holding whole groups accountable for things. And we won't get into the specifics. Obviously, there's good and bad in everywhere, and systemic things and all that. But I think the key is to know the environment that you're in and grow from it. I wrote down earlier just some names, and I was thinking about, these shows that Don's been doing, that Don hosts and has us on here. And the conversation that we're going to have is different than another conversation. And, when I'm on with Carl, or I'm on with Kelly, or I'm on with Leslie, for sure, things are different. It's a, holding those different perspectives. Now we look at things differently, and we help expand each other and how we think of things. And I think that's the beauty of doing these programs, is that because we come on here, we don't, Don, you're not inviting people on there to come here and argue and be like, you're wrong and I'm right, and and double down on what I believe. And you people that are open, that are flexible, that are curious, and we have our opinions, and we have our, we do have our certain perspectives, but I would never want to come on to here and be like, well, my perspective is better than yours, so I'm going to talk over you. That's ridiculous. But
Go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, but that's what this affords, is that we can come on here and just join together and maybe change our perspective, some of the community's perspective, in a positive way. And that's what conversation is. It moves us in the right direction, hopefully.
Absolutely. And I think, that's what I'm learning from, is not just what you do, but what you review, what you did, and what really happened that you weren't aware of during that time. Next week, we're going to have Catherine Chadwick, just for everybody's information. And Catherine, just to share with you, is a supreme art of self-craftsmanship, the science of thriving, the art of freedom. And she's a practitioner of applied positive psychology. And she actually works in a hospital right now, and wrote a book, has a whole thing about the sunshine quotient, which I'm sure she'll share with everybody. But what's fascinating is she did Saturdays with Leslie for, 10 months, 11 months, every Saturday. And if you know Leslie, it's always unexpected. She's a free spirit. And sometimes, but it was challenging in a good way, and sometimes a little bit ahead of itself. But Catherine was always poised. She was almost like not getting into that, not going to get affected by that. Let me and Leslie go at it. And what happens when you go deep, and if you talk about a week after that with Sarah Dawkins, and she's out in Spain and has moved to like 14 different countries, where her husband built houses in each one, lived there, and then sold them and went back to another country, originally from England. She was one of the few people on Sundays I never needed or wanted to invite a third person, because we'd go so deep, and deeper than, only because people allowed themselves to and didn't judge and was willing to share. And later on, you find out you made some really strong friendships. You got to know somebody really well. There's people you spend your whole life with, you don't have a clue who they are. And then you spend a few conversations with somebody, and they open you up and you open them up. And it's like, let me help you with that. Now you can help them with that. And again, it goes back and forth. But it's the bravery and the courage with someone who says, I'm just going to speak from my heart. I'm just going to share what I believe in. And most of these people have come from really, if you would hear some of the stories, and I'll let them tell it for themselves, you would not believe it, that they could have ended up there or started from there, but look at where they came from there. And I think that's an important thing, is your perspective might have been really low down, maybe for good reason, but you picked yourself up, changed your view, changed your action, and how you see things is how they are, whether they are or not. And I think, to both of you guys' points, you don't want to rain on anybody's parade, even if you're almost sure you know better, right? Well, I'm going to go see this concert. I saw that person. They're awful. You'll have a bad time. Well, why did you say that? Because they're going to go in. I'll tell you another funny story. It's always usually about the family. We used to visit my mother every year. She had a real small place down around Palm Beach. And she lived by herself, great cook. But when we were with her, every night it was like, let's go somewhere. Let's go to dinner. Because when we left, she wasn't going as many places. And my son was young, about 11 or 12 at the time. And she had her mindset on this one restaurant, and was down in Boynton or Delray Beach or somewhere around there. And we got there and it was closed. And she said, okay, let's go to this one. And after a while, I got hungry. And I said, I'm done looking. Next restaurant we go to, that's the restaurant we're eating. And I knew right then it wasn't going to work out. And it was a really good Italian restaurant. And I told my son, I whispered to him, I said, no matter what happens, she's never going to appreciate this restaurant. And he says, I'll bet you $5 I can get her to. And because he was like a favorite anyways. He would say, Grandma, man, this is such a great restaurant. I just love the food here. And he kept complimenting her. And I said, it ain't going to work. I know her. And no matter what she said, it wasn't good enough, right? And he ended up giving me the $5 afterwards. But the point is once you have your mind saying it's not going to work, it's not going to work. You'll find something wrong. You'll find some excuse or reason why. And that's why it was really my responsibility to say, okay, next pick, as opposed to we're pulling into this parking lot. We've been driving too long and we're all kind of hungry. But again, it makes you flexible and also stepping aside. Giving the bat to somebody else who hasn't had a turn in a while, even though you're a better hitter, But I always felt no matter who it was, especially I learned that from kids' sports, everybody should get a chance to play, especially at that level. It shouldn't be the best hitter. And look who we have. We have Omar here. Omar's a giant on LinkedIn, Globetrotter, doing all kinds of fascinating shows. He has a lot of interesting perspectives. Great to see you, Omar. Looking forward to getting with you again. And you're always welcome on the show. I was just mentioning, Omar, that Catherine Chadwick will be here next week. And also Sarah Dawkins will be here the week after. Got a lot of interesting people. I'm going back into memory lane to find some of these people. And that's the beauty of it, is everything doesn't have to stay the way it is to still be valuable. Friends you had are still good friends. You may not see them that often, may never see them again, but you also have gratitude and appreciation for what they brought to your life. And I think what comes around goes around. What was important to you is going to be important to people just like you. So with a couple minutes to go, Dave, why don't you share final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just share. My dad always told me that the true measure of success in life was correcting the true measure of success in life is recognizing the correct answer when told. But I would just add on to that the second measure of success is being able to share perspectives, hear countering perspectives, and then go have a beer afterwards. Because not everything that you have in your knowledge base is the correct answer in this world. Things change. Science is never settled. In one words that people have been using lately, things change, and we always have to look for new ways of viewing the world and our role in it.
Yeah, I think that's so important to healing too. The other thing I'll bring up before switching over to Jason is when you're wrong, you should admit when you're wrong and apologize, because you could put somebody on the wrong path, right? Someone has a sore throat. Well, take a couple of aspirins, take this, do this, blah, blah, blah. Well, maybe they're allergic to something. Yeah. Maybe what works for you doesn't work for them. And now you set them off on a path that you should take responsibility for and correct yourself as soon as you find out, hey, by the way, what I told you, I checked out, it's not 100%. Just keep that in mind. And I think that's important, because the question is not what you say, but why you say it and what it can do for somebody. And that saying, leave the log pile bigger than you found it. Leave everybody better than they were when they met you or when they're with you. If you're having lunch with somebody, how do you make it a good lunch for them? As opposed to, what did I get out of this? Or was it worth my time and worth my money? well, that's way too much me and not enough we. And people will remember you for the good things you've done and the good, and how many times someone just encouraged you that didn't even know they were doing that. And how many times the people discouraged you and didn't know they were doing that, you know? And if you can't say something nice, don't say anything is my motto. You know, there's so many things you can say. Why did you pick that? And usually it's because something's going on in your life, and misery does tend to like company, you know? And some people like to put pins in balloons and take wings off of flies. But that's the world, and that gives you perspective. So I'll let you close it up, Jason.
We make choices all the time. Why not choose to be happy? You know, why not choose to have our point of view, our way of looking at something is that regardless of how it turns out, I'm going to enjoy myself. You know, and there's situations, obviously, there's some really negative stuff in the world, and traveling the world. I know all of us have traveled the world and we've seen some negative things, even in the States. But why don't we choose that? You know, quick story. I know we're out of time, but my wife and I, our perspective when we go places is that we're going to enjoy ourselves no matter what. We went to Calistoga, which is up in the Napa Valley. It's this really nice place. They do mud baths and mineral baths, and they have this fake little, I forget the name of it, but kind of like Old Faithful, but it's fake. But anyway, it's beautiful. And we were going to go meet a friend of hers, and we were going to get a hotel, and we picked this hotel that we could afford, and, you know, we're up for it. Well, we drove up to the hotel, and it was like an old style hotel. One whole wing of it, like the roof had collapsed. They were like rebuilding the roof. We swear that we saw the dog Cujo came walking around the back just by himself. We're like, what's going on here? The room had a hot tub in the room. We didn't order that. It had a hot tub literally in the room. The shower was about, I'm a big guy. I'm like 6 foot, 215-ish, but probably 200 back then. I barely fit in the shower, and the shower head was just spitting out like splinters of water. It was crazy. But we had a blast. We had a great time. We laughed about it. We were like, wow, this is crazy. But we enjoyed ourselves, and we made the best of it. And that's life. You know, circumstances don't make who you are. Circumstances are what show up. How you respond to them, that's your life. And so, you know, coming from a perspective of it's going to be okay and enjoying life, finding happiness where you can, I think that's the key.
Yeah, you hit it right on the nose, Jason. And it's really not what you're doing or where you're at, but who you're doing it with, right? If you're on a beach with nothing around you, but you're with the right person, or anywhere, you can make your own happiness wherever you want it, you know? And why do you choose to restrict your happiness? Why is it okay to laugh just this much each day? Why can't you exercise your laughter and your joy? Because you can't help it. You know, you can't laugh, you can't smile and frown at the same time, right? When they say a smile is just a frown upside down. And it's those simple things that you catch yourself. And life is so short, and it's so uncertain, and no one knows what tomorrow brings. So if you have today, and last thing with perspective is go to a hospital, right? Or go to a jail and look at what these people are living in. And some people have no choice. And you say to yourself, I'm just happy I'm happy for what I don't have. Most people are unhappy because of what they don't have. I need more, I need bigger, I need better, I need this. Versus, hey, compared to that, I'm the luckiest guy in the world. And if you can consider yourself lucky, luck tends to gravitate to you. So you get what you really expect. And I think perspective is a great way of qualifying, where am I in my situation right now? Why am I carrying around this perspective? Why do I feel doom and gloom? And, you know, when it's too much, go into yourself, right? You don't have to attack the wind. Sometimes go into a room, put on a little music, give yourself the luxury of doing nothing but meditating or thinking and getting back to it, and you'll be a better person for the people you meet next. One last thing, we're way over, is I would never go to work until I was in the right mind. There were times, many times, I'd be driving to work and I'd see a park. and I pull my car in and just start walking. And about 40 minutes later, I got myself where I needed to be and went to work. Now I missed 40 minutes, but I saved everybody those 40 minutes who would have seen me. You know, how many times you been in a situation, he's not in a good mood today, don't ask, right? And you ask yourself that question yourself. But with that said, thank you, audience. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Dave. Hopefully everybody got a benefit, changed their perspective for the better. I know I did. And look forward to next week with Catherine and the three of us, and it'll even be better. So with that said, go out, have a wonderful